Wild Bill on the Submarine in World War II, or Captain Nemo rides again, or more precisely, what exactly is a submarine war? What are its aims? What methods does it employ? When we think of submarines, we usually have the mental image of a submerged ambush predator maneuvering for a certain kill, or the cat and mouse sort of thing that the USSR and NATO played in the 1970s and 1980s. Hunters in the deep, blind, using their ears instead in a cutting-edge technology attempt to hear the heartbeat pulse of enemy screw propellers before they heard yours. Indeed, the Imperial Nipponese High Fleet, the Nihon Kaigun, believed that submarines were conceived by and should be used by ninja, as they were a perfect way to slip daggers into an enemy juggernaut's side before he knows you're in reach. Like shinobi, the fleet submarines scouted for the Emperor's greatest mecha warriors, their battleships and cruisers. To reflect their operational requirements, the Japanese fleet boats were possessed of very long range, though crews were not given much in the way of comfort. In the late 1930s, a cordon of subs out there in the night was considered the best use for them until the moment was ripe. Not until the big fleets had clashed and recoiled would the silent subs slip their leashes to raid and feed on the wrecked remnants of the once proud Allied might as it fled in utter defeat. That was the idea, anyway. Sounds great to me. Japanese submarines did take out some of our major fleet units with I-19's spectacular feat. A single salvo of torpedoes from her tubes damaged the battleship North Carolina, crippled the destroyer O'Brien, who had to be sunk subsequently, and sank Valiant Wasp outright, demonstrating the potential, at least, of the guerre d'escadre when employed by a brave and talented and lucky commander. 96 U.S. vessels were confirmed sunk by Imperial Japanese Army and Imperial Japanese naval forces in the course of our conflict. 56 of these were attacked by submarines. I quote here from the Wikipedia article Subs of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Imperial Japanese Navy's doctrine of fleet warfare, guerre d'escadre, resulted in its submarines seldom posing a threat to Allied merchant convoys and shipping lanes to the degree that the Kriegsmarine's U-boats did, as they pursued commerce raiding against the Allied and neutral merchant ships. Another way to employ the submarine, as the above quote suggests, is the opposite strategy, called the guerre du corps, meaning creating an economic blockade around an enemy nation by cutting off its sea trade. Sink its merchant ships, refusing battle with its seaborne knights, strangle its industries or people into submission for lack of strategic materials or necessary nutrients. Germany, whose submarine and surface raider campaigns against Allied shipping in the World War and World War II are well popularized, pursued naval strategy in the form of an attack on the enemy's seaborne cargo routes, where they passed close to friendly shores, to be carried out by land-based air, while distant interception of trade routes would be promulgated by fleet units, disguised auxiliary cruisers, and by submarine raiders. As the Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine were at loggerheads over allocation of production priorities, inter-service rivalry served to emasculate cooperation attempts. Indeed, it is surprising that during the brief period when Focke-Wulf Condors and Donitz's U-Waffe worked together, sinkings of enemy ships soared to unprecedented heights. Once air superiority was lost, jeep carriers like Audacity brought modern fighter and interceptors out to that area formerly posted Condors only. U-boats had to waste a lot of time making submerged transitions between French bases and operational areas. At first, they would run submerged by day and then surfaced and diesel-powered by night. The employment of airborne radars and ley lights on long-range maritime patrol bombers defeated this method of transit by the middle of 1944. More subs were launched and commissioned by Germany, more than 1,100, between 1936 and mid-1945 than the total of all other nations combined. A scary thought. The 14 million tons of merchant shipping destroyed and dozens of warships sunk were achieved with a loss of 785 of those U-boats, and 33,000 out of 41,000. Crew members killed or captured. Staggering losses. The subs were mostly the Type 7, of about 750 tons displacement. Designed for North and Eastern Atlantic duty, they were cramped and cold, stank wretchedly, and did not have the endurance to stay out on patrol for extended periods. This could only be achieved by filling some ballast tanks and crew freshwater tanks with fuel oil for the outward trip. In spite of the abominable conditions that resulted from this feed the boat, not the crew doctrine, U-boat crews are legendary for their resourcefulness, determination, and the faith they place in their commander's care. New defense and weapon systems, along with modifications to existing ones, were introduced over time. Later Type 7C boats had increased dive limits, the best of the war. Then there were Vulture boats, powered by a closed system plant employing fuming hydrogen peroxide and a catalyst. Underwater speeds on these experimental boats reached 20 knots. Propulsion system explosions were common, as were fatalities on these tricky temperamental boats. Although the peroxide steam system plant is good in theory, in practice it proved impossible to maintain. Things like the Dutch Schnorkel, which allowed running on diesel power submerged, the Metox, or Biscay Cross, a radar warning receiver, sonar and radar absorbing materials for coating sails and periscope heads, and the interesting Pillenwerfer countermeasure, sought to preserve U-boat survival. These were complemented by the Lut, the Lagen Unbehanger torpedo, with a looping preset pattern meant to make multiple runs through a convoy, the Zahnkönig homing torpedo, and the ill-fated Flakboot, whose multiple 2-centimeter flak weapons failed to protect their boats from destruction. U.S. Navy submarines went a different way than their German and Japanese cousin, being more modern and more habitable in nearly every particular, especially the Gatos, reaching war zones in significant numbers in mid-42, from onboard air conditioning and food refrigeration plants through freshwater distillation, the Nelsico-Clarkson distillation method, which was later replaced, flush toilets, ship's laundry machines, and service showers, to sea and air search radars and sonar illuminators, called pingers, and depth gauges, all standard to every fleet boat until upgrades were made available. Our boats had higher sustainable top speeds, could carry more provisions and more disposable ordnance on longer patrols with far greater crew comfort than other submarine fleets. On the debit side, our Mark 14 torpedo and its problematic Mark 6 exploder were the cause of much unhappiness and several tragic losses. Eventually, after modification, the Mark 14 torpedo proved itself a dependable, maintainable weapon. U.S. Navy results in this war of attrition against Japanese naval and merchant shipping compare favorably with the German achievements when you take into account that 90% of Japan's merchant shipping tonnage, including all of her tankers, lay at the bottom of the sea in early 1945, sent there by our naval surface, air, and submarines, who accounted for 50% of it, forces, despite a much lower percentage total. Japanese shipbuilding industry simply could not keep up with the steady attrition, and so the actual tonnage of its merchant shipping steadily declined over the course of the war. Naval blockade strategy, originated by England during her glory days, was again vindicated. Germany's generally smaller subs, their standard type was the Type 7C at 750 tons and 5 tubes, versus our Gato-class at 1,525 tons and 10 tubes, had impressive results, it's true. But in the end, the Western Allies ended the war with far more merchant tonnage afloat than they had back in early 1941. Contrasting this, the U.S. submarine arm and the U.S. Navy in general practically ripped out the Japanese jugular, her merchant ship lifeline, as attested to by several Nipponese admirals and generals when interviewed after the war, and in the official Office of Naval Intelligence analysis of the Sea War, and of course the brilliantly addended Strategic Bombing Survey. Also, Dernitz's debriefing makes excellent reading and translation, giving an unbiased opinion of these efforts and most specifics. Japan developed some remarkable hardware. Sizable fleet boats like the B-1 class with long endurance and excellent torpedoes, as their Type 97 submarine torpedo was the sub-launched version of the famous Type 93 oxygen torpedo. Her Chiton man torpedoes, her Sea Dragon mini-subs, Sentoku giants with their own tactical air support, and high-speed electro-boats like the I-201 come to mind, but these vessels, particularly the last three, were hampered by rushed evolution and doctrinal and operational strictures. They were seldom employed en masse, nor granted leave to seek targets on the basis of their commander's judgment, and never mounted an effective garde de course, being used instead to keep tags on our fleet movements. Hedgehog, squid, sonobuoys, and Fido. Also, nobody but nobody could do anti-submarine warfare like the Western Allies in World War II. Despite awesome scores achieved before the Black Month of March 1943, an aggregate total of 14 million tons of Allied merchant shipping in all, the U-boat arm was hounded down, attacked without mercy, and almost 90% of it was sent to the bottoms of the oceans where they'd plied their lethal trade. Radar-equipped B-24s and short Sunderlands could find Huff-Duff triangulated U-boats even in the dark. Avengers could drop sonobuoys around a U-boat's suspected position so that others following could drop Fido homing torpedoes one by one on its head. Surface ships used depth charges, woefully imprecise, and their inevitable detonation severely restricted the maintenance of contact with the offending U-boat, until the Hedgehog multiple spigot rocket mortar was devised. The 36 projectile barrage from the Hedgehog projector struck the water in front of the ASW frigate, which could continue to maintain contact with the enemy submersible all the while. A Hedgehog rocket, you see, only detonated if it hit the enemy sub. Squid used a larger rocket warhead, trading this for fewer missiles per barrage. So effective has this method been that today, Russian Federation ships still mount RBU ASW mortars for close-in ASW work. Magnetic anomaly detectors are also important today, though less effective in the open ocean now that subs can and must hide deeper and move quieter than ever before. This short-range concept was developed separately by several nations toward the end of the war, but was employed best and most effectively by U.S. patrol bombers and our K-class armed blimps, which skimmed the ocean's surface. Today and beyond. Today, submarines don't surface at all, other than at their ports of call. SOSUS arrays give us confidence that all underwater traffic is being closely monitored, but our competitors and we have pursued a constant one-upmanship in naval matters, well, since forever. Newer subs are quieter, can also go very fast at need, are armed with intelligent or wire-guided torpedoes, or supersonic ones like Squall. Some carry weapons that can go airborne to lob nukes hundreds or thousands of miles with fair CEP characteristics. Modern radar absorbent material and sonar absorbent material coatings might render them invisible to anything but a time-consuming, painstaking search, and who has time for that anymore? The most survivable submarines are the nuclear attack types, and these, it seems probable, are only few in number. Their production runs limited to a very few nations, and their unit cost high enough to assure small production runs. Since a nuke attack sub, that's what they were once called, can be modified to fire tactical or strategic cruise missiles, Harpoon or Tomahawk TLAM, with ranges up to, well, from 30 to 1,800 miles, you'd think it would be an important enemy, one in every potential antagonist's thoughts. Indeed, the navies of the world have invested heavily in fast frigates, or ASW frigates as they can be called. These are the smallest warships that still look imposing enough to be called a navy. From 1,000 to 4,000 tons displacement, they are a balance of armor, punch, and maneuverability. Concessions to more tightly contested budgets, however, have brought about a negative synergy. Now every ship must be able to do it all, when planners know very well that's not how it's done. Battleships are not very maneuverable. Fleet destroyers at high speed cannot hunt for subs effectively. Carriers are not for going into harm's way. So they've gone and made the ASW frigate into a mini battleship, sort of. Small frigates capable of trolling at a known area at low speed are the only surface ships that can effectively and economically remain in position to hunt for a submerged submarine. With adequate sonar systems, they're the best at it, all of which does not make them battleships. See, today's frigates have anti-ship missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, anti-missile missiles, and guns, in addition to the ASW necessities, which are depth charges, homing torpedoes, good sonars, and quick-thinking captains. With all these systems competing for the captain's ear, it becomes hard to keep it in perspective vis-a-vis a changing world as the carrier groups set slowly in the west and you're stuck out here in contested waters with who knows how many enemy subs prowling about. See, You can't just blaze away at enemy bombers, as your radar can only illuminate one target for your primary AA system to engage at any time, and there might be 20 naval-eyed superintendard skimming the waves ready to launch those pesky exocets, or silkworms, or harpoons. I mean, you never know. In World War II, a frigate had 30 depth charges to roll off the transom, a forward-firing Hedgehog ASW mortar, radar, sonar, and a largely seasick crew — most of the ships were notorious rollers — to fight submarines with. She also had one, two, or maybe three 3-inch 50 caliber dual-purpose guns, 2 or 4 40mm Bofors light AA autocannon, and most likely a bunch of 20mm autocannon as well. Despite the limitations of old tech, these guns and autocannon could spray large arcs of the sky simultaneously at the whim of the gun captain, something modern systems can't do. Even multiple engagement systems — not naming names, you guys know who you are — will be stymied when missiles start exploding in the middle of a radar infrared detection environment. Suddenly, the world, the air, is full of radar-reflecting fragments and infrared jamming and confusing smokes. In this situation, no matter how many missiles you're controlling, you've gone blind, and all the parameters are incapable of changing with the real-time situation. For a timeless moment, therefore, low-tech solutions come to the fore. The ramming attack. The dumb torpedo who doesn't care what kind of countermeasures are in its way. Mines and other area denial munitions hiding just below the ground. What if you look up after an EMP has knocked out all your communications and targeting systems and glimpse a low-tech 70-kilometer range ballistic missile, often referred to as a Scud by the mass media, is headed your way? Seems dumb until you read down the list of nations with nuclear capability and recognize that they make them smaller now than they used to. In the chaos following the first exchange of tactical fire between fleets in the age of smart missiles, the radios are out, the sonar is blaring noise, the radar is all buggy, fire control is helpless, and you can't see the rest of the battle group because of the smoke. Who has time to look over the side and see that little streak of bubbles headed your way? Thanks for listening. This is Wild Bill, signing off.